everybody, welcome to my channel. My name's Lorelei and my channel is about metaphysical, spirituality, wellness and mythology. Today I'm going to talk about Vikings. Most of what we know about Vikings is from the ages 793 BC to 1066 BC. There has been some recent research finding the possibility of Vikings from 3,000 years ago instead of 1,000 years ago, which would somewhat change the history books. Researchers have found many paintings in Norway, rock paintings that have Viking ships, and up to 90% of rock paintings found in Norway have these Viking ships pictured on them. Researchers are now debating between themselves as to whether these Viking ships were really in use at this time. This was during the Bronze Age, and so if this was to be true, then Vikings would be a much older race of people than what we have known for at the moment, which was only 1,000 years ago. So this would be a great discovery to say that Vikings were around for such a long time ago. And the early Scandinavians were so much more advanced than we thought, and not just hunters and cavemen style people, but some of these Viking ships in the paintings look really similar to Viking ships. So similar, in fact, that the researchers that discovered them first assumed, oh, okay, these are pictures that the Vikings did. And then they did further investigations and found out that these images were from 3,000 years ago. And so the fact that the Viking ships are exactly the same as what the Vikings used is what is causing researchers to debate now whether these Viking ships were actually around 3,000 years ago. They could have been taking advantage of the trade in the Bronze Age and traveling through the Mediterranean into places like Italy and Spain to get these precious metals that were being traded at the time. There has been not a whole lot more evidence so far, but this is a really new finding. So there you go. As far as we know, Vikings were around 1,000 years ago between the ages of 793 BC to 1066 BC. But now there's been findings of these paintings from 3,000 years ago. Originating from what is now modern-day Denmark, Sweden and Norway, they also settled in England, Ireland, Iceland, North America, Scotland, Wales and other parts of the European mainland. There is evidence of Viking settlements in North Germany and along the Rhine, although they really had a hard time conquering most of Germany and making settlements here, as Germany is mostly inland and these were seafaring people who did most of their missions by the sea, and so the middle of Germany just proved too difficult for them to conquer. Eric the Red is noted to be the first Viking to discover Greenland, and his son Leif Erikson was the first Viking noted to discover North America. Vikings often had nicknames such as Eric the Red to do with their personalities and individual stories, which makes them to be quite interestingly named. 6% of people in the UK have DNA from Vikings and 10% of people in Sweden. There is strong Viking heritage in many other countries such as Iceland, Ireland and Greenland, and even here in North Germany, meaning that many people actually probably have some Viking DNA in them. Vikings were known as seafaring raiders, traders, explorers, settlers, and pirates. Often known as bloody raiders, let's be honest that the history books were not exactly written by Vikings, and perhaps they were not as bloody and brutal as we have been known to think. History can often be biased as to who has written the history books, and let's be honest, Vikings didn't write their own history books. Vikings would also like to be known often as family-orientated people who created farms and settlements and villages, raiding other lands due to the fact that they were overpopulated themselves and simply needed more places to live. Vikings were known to treat their women exceptionally well, and they had a lot of rights during this time. From running the farms and the finances while their husbands were away, to being allowed to divorce and own their own land themselves. They were also allowed to join the army and fight like fierce warriors amongst the other men. Viking language was Old Norse, and this was developed from Proto-Norse in the 7th century. It went on to be developed in the 15th century into other North Germanic languages. Some of these languages are Icelandic, Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish. Icelandic is the least spoken North Germanic language, but it's actually the language that resembles what the Vikings spoke most. Runes are an ancient Germanic alphabet, actually related to the Roman alphabet. Runes have been found inscribed on ships, coins, garment brooches, and even swords and shields to give them magic power, as some runes are known to be protective and others are even symbols of war gods. Runestones were created to inscribe stories of great Vikings, and some Vikings even inscribed these stones to tell their own stories, as Vikings were quite bold and proud of themselves. So they like to say things like, "Oh, look at what I did. I conquered this land and I'm going to tell my great story on this runestone so that everybody knows about my fierce battles." Runestones were also created to remember the dead, although they were never used as grave markings and instead placed along roadsides and paths where people could see them and read them as they walked by. As runes are mostly written on wood, stone, or iron, the difficulty of carving the alphabet into these hard surfaces created angular shapes and not rounded shapes like the letters that we have today. As Vikings travelled the world, they took runes with them. Evidence of this can be found from English runes being in Greenland, Greece, Turkey, and Russia. Known for pagan and Old Norse religion dating back to 500 BC, they often themselves did not like to name their religion, and more followed along with gods and goddesses such as Odin, Thor, Freya, and Loki. This gave meaning to their lives. Also known as heathens, and heathens are people who were known to follow along with the old ways, even after Christianity had arrived. The good life for a Viking consisted of everything life has to offer: life, death, blessings, and pain. They embraced the good and the bad and took it all as a part of life, using the bad as a way to lift up and celebrate good deeds performed by themselves and other fellow Vikings. They immersed themselves in nature and found absolute enchantment simply in the way things are. Their disappearance has been known to be caused from everything from political to religious, as lands became better at protecting themselves and Christianity became more widespread. It's also been put down to climate change and plague and other things such as poor land management provided by the fact that farmers were taken away from their jobs and given other jobs, and the farms were not tended to enough, which led to drought and therefore a lack of food and resources. A combination of these things is most likely. But it's safe to say that the Viking era lives on today via genetics and history, popular culture, and celebrating and recreating the Viking way of life. I hope that you've all enjoyed learning a bit more about Vikings just as I have. Thanks for watching. Bye!